Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're totally unpacking the fascinating sociological concepts of Chapter 2, literally all about cultural change in India. We're going to explore how a society, doesn't just flip a switch and change overnight. It transforms through this massive complex web of deliberate actions and quiet underlying shifts. If you've ever wondered how modern Indian culture became this incredible tapestry of old and new, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Okay, let's dive right into this. A.K. Ramanujan once painted this really incredible picture of his father. He was a South Indian Brahmin gentleman, right? And he'd wear a traditional, neat white turban and his caste mark. But then he'd pair all that with English serge jackets, two-tone ties, and Cromans collar studs right over his muslin dhotis. This single little anecdote perfectly hooks us into our core theme today, which is hybridity. This explainer is really all about how individuals and entire societies actively mix and match the traditional with the modern. So, here is our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to look at the colonial catalyst, the social reformers, blending tradition and modernity, the concept of Sanskritization, and finally, wrap it up with the modern Indian paradox. Starting with Section 1, the colonial catalyst, a true shock to the system. You see, the arrival of colonialism was just a massive shock to the system. It brought these really profound structural changes. We're talking industrialization, urbanization, totally new living arrangements. And it basically acted like a giant mirror, forcing Indian society to reflect on itself, its norms, its values, and really figure out how to adapt to this completely new world order. The colonial era introduced entirely new modes of communication and transportation. Think about the printing press, the telegraph, the microphone, and the rapid movement of people on railways and steamships. Sociologically, what this meant was that ideas could travel faster than ever before. Social reformers from Punjab could instantly exchange thoughts with folks in Bengal, and thinkers in Madras could coordinate with those in Maharashtra. The physical infrastructure literally fueled an intellectual awakening. And this brilliantly illustrates that literal arrival of modernity. We're looking at 1914, the very first Ford Model T arriving in Dehradun. Just imagine the absolute awe of the locals who had never, ever seen an automobile before, all crowding around to look at this engine with rubber tires. It actually took them an hour just to fit the wheels on. This wasn't just a fun new vehicle. It represented a massive shift in societal structures and daily life that everyday people were suddenly forced to interact with. Moving on to Section 2, the social reformers, fighting social evils. So in response to these sweeping structural changes in the 19th and early 20th centuries, this group of really conscious, deliberate changemakers stepped forward. They looked at their society, saw its flaws, and basically said, okay, we need to fight back against this deep-rooted discrimination. These prominent reformers didn't just sit on the sidelines. They functioned as dynamic characters responding directly to a massive societal crisis. They went after severe social evils that were plaguing Indian society at the time, practices like sati, child marriage, the ban on widow remarriage, and really oppressive caste discrimination. And while, sure, attempts to fight discrimination definitely existed in pre-colonial India, like through the Bhakti and Sufi movements, what really made these 19th century reformers so different was the incredibly modern context they were operating in. Let's look at two specific intellectual pioneers here. On the left, we have Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. His interpretation of Islam heavily emphasized free inquiry, and he pointed out the similarities between Quranic revelations and the actual laws of nature discovered by modern science. And then on the right is Kandukuri Veerasalingam. He brilliantly blended traditional logic with modern biology by literally translating the works of the eminent biologist Julius Huxley. I mean, these guys were walking bridges between two worlds. So, the crucial point is that these reformers possessed a really powerful intellectual hybridity. They didn't just abandon their heritage, no way. Instead, they justified their progressive causes by simultaneously citing modern Western concepts, like humanitarian rights doctrines, right alongside ancient religious texts like the Hindu Shastras. Take Rajaram Mohan Roy, for example. He attacked the practice of sati using both humanitarian rights doctrines and Hindu Shastras at the exact same time. It was an incredibly creative combination of ideas. Section 3. Blending Tradition and Modernity, an Era of Active Debate. This whole era wasn't about just erasing the past or blindly copying the West, not at all. It was an era of intense active debate. People were rigorously questioning and really reinterpreting what tradition and modernity actually meant for themselves and for their communities. And to facilitate these debates, modern social organizations were set up all across the country. Debates were becoming institutionalized. A really standout example is the All India Muslim Ladies Conference, founded in 1914. Here, women actively took charge of their own societal narrative. For instance, Jahanara Shah Nawaz proposed this fierce, active resolution against the evils of polygamy, arguing it was against the true spirit of the Quran, which ended up sparking massive debate in the press. Across all these varied movements, though, one shared belief really rang true. For society to progress, women absolutely must be educated. Jyotiba Phule notably opened the very first school for women in Pune. And what's fascinating is some reformers even argued that women were educated in pre-modern India just to justify opening these schools, showing yet again how traditional history was being actively leveraged to secure modern progress.
All right, Section 4, the concept of Sanskritization, a bottom-up cultural shift.
Now, we're going to shift our narrative away from the highly visible, famous reformers and look at the invisible, deeply ingrained societal currents that predated colonial rule entirely. I want you to really think about this for a second. We've talked a lot about deliberate changemakers, but how does an entire culture shift organically from the bottom up without famous leaders publishing journals or holding big conferences? Well, the answer lies in a major sociological theory coined by M.N. Srinivas, Sanskritization. Basically, it's defined as the process by which a low caste or tribe takes over the customs, rituals, beliefs, and lifestyle of a high twice-born caste. This was a completely bottom-up process. Its main purpose? Simply to improve a group's position within the local, highly rigid caste hierarchy. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this flow of cultural influence wasn't just some one-size-fits-all phenomenon. In areas where highly Sanskritized castes were dominant, sure, the whole region's culture shifted that way. But in areas where non-Sanskritic castes held power, the influence flowed the other direction, a process they termed de-Sanskritization. For example, over in Punjab, the culturally Sanskritic influence was actually never very strong. Instead, for centuries, Persian influence was the dominant force. But we have to remember, adopting these customs wasn't just some peaceful, easy transition. In a highly unequal society, trying to adopt higher caste customs was actually quite dangerous. Take the really powerful anecdote of Kumud Pade, a Dalit woman who became a Sanskrit teacher. She was drawn to Sanskrit to break into a field that was completely restricted by both gender and caste, and she wanted to read the original text for herself. But as her autobiography recounts, her journey was met with varied reactions, ranging from mere surprise to severe hostility and brutal rejection. The dominant caste heavily guarded their cultural markers. And finally, Section 5, the modern Indian paradox, living, breathing culture. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it resolves the tension of our whole explainer. It shows us that tradition and modernity are absolutely not mutually exclusive buckets. They are living, breathing entities that people are constantly learning, modifying, and adapting. These massive sociological concepts actually live right in our closets. Take the modern sari, for example. Traditionally, the sari is a loose, unstitched piece of cloth that's worn very differently depending on the region. But the standard way the modern middle-class woman wears it today, that's actually a completely novel combination. It's the traditional Indian cloth paired perfectly with the Western petticoat and blouse. It is literally the ultimate everyday example of how structural diversity shapes this fascinating mix-and-match reality. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. As we've seen today, cultural change isn't just history from a textbook. It's an ongoing, everyday reality of adapting and adopting. So I want you to look at your own life, your routines, your clothes, your beliefs. Where do you fit into this ongoing blend of tradition, modernization, and westernization? I really hope this explainer has given you a fresh lens to view the cultural tapestry around you. Keep questioning, keep observing, and keep learning.